NCAA tournament expansion talks are flaring up again, and while we don't want it, money talks, and this thing might be inevitable.
You are Locked On College Basketball, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hey there, what's up? Happy Friday. Welcome into the Locked On College Basketball Podcast, the only daily national college hoop show out there. Even all summer long, we're coming at you all the time. We are your hosts. This is Andy Patton. I'm Isaac Shade, and you're joining us at the place to get your college basketball content every single day. Thanks for making us your first listen or watch, and we want to remind you that you can get every episode ad-free on Amazon Music. Special shout out to all you everydayers out there and all the members of the Locked On College Basketball Discord. This episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. All right, Andy, it's kind of a fine show coming up. And I don't mean that. We hope the content's great. It's just fine in terms of we got to talk about this again. Yeah. Because we're looking at NCAA tournament expansion. We're going to give our thoughts and some potential outside the box models of how they could go about this if they do it. And hey, great news. We're actually going to get an event on opening day of college basketball this year instead of the best team against the 362nd best team in the nation, Andy. So that'll be fun. We're going to get to that later in the show. But Andy, let's start with this NCAA tournament expansion news. We'll just give some brief exposition on it, just in case some people don't have all this knowledge that has come out. And then I want to come to you for your initial thoughts, and then we'll flesh it out more. So on Wednesday, Yahoo's Ross Dellinger reports that on Wednesday, NCAA officials presented expansion options for the tournament at the D1 Summer Commissioners Conference that they have. And, we don't have every last detail on this, which is kind of fun because it allows us to speculate. But he does note that officials declined to speak publicly about the models. As part of this article, Andy, he says, quote, Dan Gavitt unveiled the models in a presentation Wednesday at the commissioner's annual summer meeting. In the culmination of months of work, okay, I don't know why it takes that long, Gavitt outlined possibilities for what commissioners will believe to be, and here's the key, an inevitable expansion of the men's event. Andy, we'll get to what that means and looks like in a second, but just this idea, are you still out on it or are you coming around to it?
Yeah, I'm still not a fan of expanding the NCAA tournament. I get it. I certainly get why the power conferences are pushing it, and I think that that's the part of the reason that I'm not super on board with it, because, and I've seen some of the arguments that people have that are pro expansion. They're like, well, this Indiana State team should have been in the tournament last year and they missed out, and et cetera. And it's like, if the model that was being pushed was going to encourage more teams like that getting into the NCAA tournament, then sure. But it's not, because it is not being pushed by mid-major conference commissioners. It is being pushed by people like Greg Sankey and Brett Yormark and the commissioners of the power conference.
SEC and Big 12 for those who don't know.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And they're pushing to get more of their teams into the NCAA tournament. And while I do think that there were some high major programs last year that didn't make the tournament that maybe had an argument for it, part of that was because we had a flurry of bid thieves, which just kind of cut the bubble a little bit. Teams like Wake Forest and Pitt, you could make an argument they deserved it, but I also think, that Virginia didn't deserve it. So if they got some spots that maybe they didn't, the power conference has already got spots that they probably didn't need last year. So that's more my issue with it. I just don't want to see more mediocre teams making the tournament. And Ken Pomeroy was on Twitter and he's advocating for expansion. And the point that he made was that in 1985, when the tournament first expanded to 64 teams, I think 22% of NCAA tournament or Division I teams made the tournament. Mm-hmm. And this past year, 19% of Division I teams made the tournament. And so he's saying that it's actually more exclusive than it's ever been. And while that's true, the 70 or so Division I teams that have been added since 1985 are not very, very few of them are teams that have ever or will ever compete for NCAA tournament bids. So I don't think that we need to expand. I certainly don't think we need to expand in a way that's going to get us more barely above 500 teams in the power conferences, because I just don't think there's a huge market for watching more of those teams play in this tournament. But I agree with the sentiment that it's inevitable. It's going to happen. It's going to happen. The power conferences have a ton of power right now. They can even just vaguely threaten to break off from the NCAA, and the NCAA is going to do whatever they can to keep them around. This is a way to placate those power conference tournaments or power conference commissioners who are, frankly, looking to do whatever they can to not ever have to play a mid-major program again. That's what they want. Some of them have directly said it. Some of them kind of dance around saying it, but that's what they want. And the NCAA is smart enough to recognize that one of the biggest polls of the NCAA tournament is that Cinderella side of things, and that removing that from the NCAA tournament is a massively bad idea in terms of public perception and all of that. And so they don't want to do that, but they also don't want to risk losing that partnership with the power conferences. So they're stuck in the middle, and they kind of have to do whatever small steps they can take to avoid some major decision that is going to piss a lot of people off. And so a 72 team tournament, even a 76 team tournament, I don't love it. You don't love it. A lot of the people listening don't love it, but it is better than the alternatives of losing the power conferences or losing the automatic qualifying bids. So I think we're just kind of stuck accepting that this is going to happen, and it's going to happen. It sounds like pretty soon.
And Andy, that is the delicate dance that the NCAA has to keep doing, because for those who are aware, this is their biggest cash cow. It's not the college football playoff, because that is not an entity owned by the NCAA. So they've got to find out how to placate both sides of this thing. And that's the unfortunate thing. So I love everything you laid out there. Let me give a few more details, and then we'll see what we want to say next about it. So in Dellinger's reporting, he mentions that there are two models that Dan Gavitt presented to the conference commissioners. One model with 72 total teams, meaning 4 more, an expansion of 4, and one with 76 teams, an expansion of 8 more. Now, as Andy said earlier, coming up in a little bit in segment 2, we're going to talk about what that could look like, how you would go about doing that. So we won't go there quite yet. In terms of when this would happen, Andy just said that, could be soon. It would not happen this upcoming season, 24-25. But Andy, this could happen as soon as this time next year. We could be talking about, all right, folks, gear up, because we're about to have 76 teams in this field. And so that seems like a very strong possibility, because if it goes through, they're not going to wait around, because the landscape's constantly changing, right? And so that's where it'd be. A couple other quick things of details, and I'll pass it back to you. Who would these extra teams be? Dellinger says, quote, with additional at-large selections. And that's obvious, Andy, because we've only got 31 conferences. Remember, it was 32, folks. Pac-12 is dead and gone. So we've got 31 automatic qualifiers, and that's where that's going to be. So obviously these teams have to come from at-large selections. That's just where it is, unless, and I don't think they do this, but unless you find other automatic qualifying criteria, allowing some regular season champs in that don't win the conference tournament, especially as you've stripped that away from the NIT. That's not going to happen, but it's that kind of thing. And then, Andy, I think the other fun thing to talk about here is, where would this occur? Because you can't do it all in Dayton, nor does that make geographical sense. So Dellinger also talks about that we would add at least one additional first 4 sites. So right now, there are 4 Playin Games. All 4 of them happen at Dayton, 2 on Tuesday, 2 on Wednesday of NCAA tournament week. Andy, I'm of the opinion, I'm curious your thought, that it would make sense to do, if we add another site, to do it geographically somewhere else. And for me, something else further west, so that we could intentionally place teams closer to the pods they would wind up playing in on Thursday and Friday.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. And I think that's the direction that this is likely going to go. And I think they'll probably try to pick a permanent spot like they have with Dayton, whether it's Vegas or Seattle or Portland or the Sanford Pentagon in South Dakota, which is we'll talk about that later in the show. It's a very, very trendy place to play college basketball games these days. I think that's probably what they're going to do. They're going to pick a spot farther west. They're going to have it locked in as the spot where they have these games. And I don't hate that. I think if this expansion is going to happen, I think that's the way to do it. Put the teams out there that whoever wins that pot or that game is going to end up, in the region that's in Boise or Seattle or San Diego or wherever, so that you have a little bit of less travel time. I think that's kind of a cut and dry, obvious, easy way to handle that. And I'm hoping that they will see it that way and put it together as such, because that just makes the most sense.
Yeah, absolutely it does, Andy. And just one other very quick thing, Dellinger says, if this happens for the guys, it's expected it will happen on the women's side as well. And Andy, I think not too fine a point on it, neither you and I want this right now. But again, we do feel that it is going to be inevitable at some point. So I think the thing for us all to do is just start feeling okay with it and just wrapping your brain around it.
Right. And that's what we want to talk about here coming up next is who's going to benefit from this, what teams, what conferences, what it might look like, what those matchups are going to look like. And then we're also going to give some alternative options, some things that, we don't know exactly what has been proposed, but we're going to come up with some of our own suggestions on ways that we think this might work that is the most enjoyable out of a situation that we're not super thrilled about. So we're going to get to that in just a second. Right after I tell you all about today's sponsor, Gametime. Folks, minor league baseball season is here, and I live like 10 minutes away from a local stadium, and I love being able to make last-minute decisions to head out to the ballpark. And that's why I use Gametime, because prices on the Gametime app, folks, they actually go down the closer it gets to first pitch. And with killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, and their lowest price guarantee, Gametime takes the guesswork out of buying tickets. And if you're somebody who's always concerned about whether your tickets are going to be fake, if you buy them from a third-party place, you're going to show up to the arena, ticket's not going to work, it's embarrassing, you hate that, then one of the best things about Gametime is your purchase is covered by the most flexible customer service policy in the entire ticketing industry. Personally, I love having that peace of mind. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app now, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege, and you'll get $20 off your first purchase. Folks, 2 tickets, minor league baseball game, that's like $25. You can get it for $5 if you use and redeem code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off. Terms do apply. Download the Gametime app today. Last minute tickets, lowest prices, guaranteed. All right, Isaac, continuing our conversation about the seemingly inevitable NCAA tournament expansion, which could be coming as soon as the 25-26 season. And one of the things in this article written by Ross Dellinger at Yahoo was that we're not seeing the actual models. Apparently, Dan Gavitt and the staff worked on this for months prior to presenting it. So I'm hoping that means it's very complex, or maybe it just takes them a really long time to put together something like that. But
Andy, the model I'm going to present, I literally came up with while I was sitting on the toilet going number 2 like 30 minutes ago. What are we doing here?
It shouldn't take this long. It should not take this long. But we know that there's 2 proposals, 72 games, 76 games. That's kind of the extent of what we know. And we can make some assumptions about that. Obviously, there are going to be additional at-large bids because there's only a finite amount of automatic qualifiers that'll make it. But part of the conversation that I'm curious about is whether they will make automatic qualifiers from mid-major conferences participate in the play-in games. Because again, this is a simple battle of the big schools want it, the small schools don't. The big schools want the teams that they perceive to be weaker, which, if you're the winner of a small conference and you're going to slot in as a 14, 15, or 16 seed, you probably are not as good as those 500 mid-major or 500 high major teams. I think that's fair to say. Like Northwestern, if they make the tournament as a 16 and 17 team, they're probably going to beat a 16 seed 9 times out of 10. I don't think that that's a incorrect thing to say, but I don't agree with the idea that if you get an automatic qualifier, you have to play in a play-in game. I think that's wrong. I think that the 64 spots in the NCAA tournament, if you're considering all these extra games to be playing into the tournament, those 64 spots should be reserved for every single automatic qualifier. I firmly believe that. I think a lot of people firmly believe that. I know that the small conference commissioners very clearly believe in that because they think their teams that win that automatic qualifier deserve that opportunity to compete to get to the round of 32 and not have to go through extra hoops. Whereas a team that didn't win their conference tournament, that maybe didn't win more than 52% of their games in conference play, doesn't necessarily, like if they want to get into the tournament, they should have to win some extra games. The problem is the power conferences, again, they have a lot of sway. They have a lot of pull. They might be able to change the mind on this, even though I think the majority of the public, and I don't want to speak for everybody, but I think generally that what I just laid out is an opinion shared by most people who watch college basketball, who cover college basketball, who talk about college basketball. I think generally that the belief is that if you're an automatic qualifier, you should get at one of those 64 spots. But I am very curious if they're going to mess around with potential. I mean, we already have 16 seeds doing play-in games, so I know it's already happening, but I'm very curious how that's going to work. I'm also curious what seeds are this. Is it like all 11 seeds? Is it going to be all 10 seeds? Like, how are they going to shake that out? Last year it was different than it's been in the past. I think last year they were 10 seeds when typically they've been 11 seeds in the past. Like, I'm curious if that will continue to change on a year-to-year basis, or if they'll lock that in. There's a lot of things, again, without having seen this proposal, seen any of the stuff that they talked about, we don't really know. Some of that stuff, I think, could change somewhat dramatically my opinion about this. I think if they do it in a way that I don't, there's ways that they could do this that aren't going to bother me that much.
Yep.
I'm still not a big fan of expansion, but there's ways where it's like, okay, that's fine.
It's more palatable. Yeah.
But there's some ways where I'm like, that's horrible. And so I'm really curious to see what direction it's going to go, because I'm not a fan of expansion, but my opinion about this particular expansion could vary wildly depending on what they're trying to do here.
The one pushback I've heard from the smaller conferences on why they do like to play in the play-in games is because that still counts as an NCAA tournament.
Yeah, that's a good point.
To their conference. And so I hear that and get that, because it's a chance to win some big time money for conferences that don't have a ton. But outside of that is the only valid argument I've heard for why it would be good. And Andy, I think another thing, like, there might be some of the bigger conference commissioners that would actually want their schools playing, like, let's get as many at-large teams in these play-in games as possible. Because let's be honest, people aren't really tuning in to play-in games to watch small majors against small majors.
Right.
But these bigger fan bases of the middling at-large teams are going to tune in for those games. And so that's going to get bigger and better viewership on those games.
Right. I mean, last year, a theoretical game in this situation would have been like St. John's versus Wake Forest. Yeah. I was like, I'm not going to lie to you. I'd have watched the hell out of that.
100%.
That would have been a pretty good game.
100%.
Yeah.
Dude, and so the thing is, right now, folks, if you're not aware of the model, we have 8 teams that go to Dayton right now. It's split right down the middle, 4 at-larges, 4 automatic qualifiers. So the question is, do they, like, if we expand to 72 or 76, do they try to keep that balanced, where it might be like all 4 16 seeds are play-in games, all 4 11 seeds are play-in games, something of that nature? Or, to your question, could we keep it at just 4 AQs and then expand the rest of these to be at-large teams? That is, Andy, what to me makes it, as you were talking about, a little bit more palatable, and how I hope they would approach it. So, Andy, the question then becomes, how many teams are involved in the play-in games? Because the math gets weird. So, folks, we'll give it to you this way. If it turns into a 72-team field, that means you've got to lose 8 teams to get down to 64. So that means 16 teams are going to be involved in these play-in games. If it's a 76-team field, you got to lose 12 teams out of play-in games to get down to 64. That means, Andy, we're involving 24 teams. And that means if you keep it split, you're involving your 12 lowest automatic qualifiers. That is unequivocally not a good thing and not fair for these conferences. And I will push back on that till I am blue in the face.
It's hard to like that.
I mean, goodness gracious. And so, I mean, in that model, I could see us expanding to like 8 of them and keeping the other 16 at larges, but good grief, that's not fair. So, Andy, I mean, there are other ways to skin this cat, though. We could come up with alternative options, and it would be tough because of timelines and stuff like that. And I get that even before I propose this. But what if, instead of, like, if you go to 72 teams, instead of 8 play-in games, what if you have, with these 16 teams, 4 14 brackets, and there are 4 slots to play into the main field. Maybe it's 2 16 seeds and 2 11 seeds or something. And whoever wins this 14 bracket gets to move in like that. And so, I know the timing would be insanely tough on this, but what if you went, I just don't even know how the timing works, but it would be something better than just like, all right, here's 8 more play-in games. At least it's a different kind of thing. And we see that in tennis, where qualifiers have to play into the main bracket. or that's kind of how the NCAA baseball tournament works, where you have all the 16 regionals with 4 teams and only one comes out of it. It's a thought, Andy.
Yeah, and I think the hard part is one of the last things that I would want to mess with is the Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday schedule that they have right now. And it's hard to see any of these alternative options, or even really what they're trying to propose in general, working in that. Like, and I also think, like, if you're going to be a play-in team, like, I think it's okay for their schedule to be hard. Like, I think it's fine that you have to play on Tuesday and you have to play on Wednesday, and then you got to maybe play on Friday. Like, that's hard and that's challenging. But if you don't want to play in that game, have a better record.
Yeah. Except for the AQ.
Yeah. I think it's fine for that to be challenging, but it has to be tenable. Like, we can't be playing games on Monday because Selection Sunday is on Sunday afternoon. Like, that's too quick of a turnaround. We can't be playing games into Thursday because we're not going to move that Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, the epic 64-16 4-day stretch. Like, there's no way they're messing with that, because not only is that really popular among college basketball fans, which is sort of what they care about, it's also a tremendous moneymaker, which is definitely what they care about. So I don't think they're going to move the Thursday through Sunday schedule, in which case you pretty much just have Tuesday and Wednesday, and you got to figure out a way to get all these games done. And 4-team pods definitely is appealing, and I think interesting, and I think potentially doable, but it's challenging with the crunched timeline that they have with these games.
So I think it's going to be same old, Andy, just adding a bunch more teams to Tuesday and Wednesday at different sites, and that's what it'll be. Well, I'll tell you what, Mr. Patton, let's go from the end of the college basketball season all the way to the very beginning of it, and November 4th. Andy, we talk about this every year on the show on opening day. We bemoan it, but college basketball's opening day hasn't given us really much of anything the past few years. But some quality mid-major programs are hoping to change that with the help of another college basketball program. We'll talk about that in just a second. Andy, each of the past 2 years on our show, because that's the existence of our show to this point, we have bemoaned the lack of quality basketball games, or at least quality matchups, I guess I should say, on opening day of college basketball season, which is typically like the first Monday of November, which it will be this year, November 4th. Hey, the day before a presidential election, by the way. So that's a fun matchup. Andy, it was reported on Thursday morning from Field of 68, who is another like college basketball entity that covers all sorts of stuff, that they are creating, hosting, sponsoring an opening day event in, you talked about it earlier, the Sanford Pentagon in Sioux Falls, South Dakota. Andy, these are not massive, big marquee games or teams, but it is very solid mid-major teams going up against one another. The 3 matchups that we're aware of right now from the report from Field of 68 is Charleston, Pat Kelsey-less Charleston versus Southern Illinois, although they do have a Chris Mack coming in. St. Louis, and who we some rec specs from Robbie Avila against Santa Clara out of the West Coast Conference, and then McNeese State against South Dakota State. We're going to get some jackrabbits staying home in South Dakota there. So Andy, not the marquee thing, but we got some really solid mid-major programs in this thing.
Couple of things to say on this. First of all, I am curious if Field of 68 is going to rebrand. If the NCAA tournament expands, it would be risky to continue to have your company's name be based on the number of teams in the NCAA tournament. That's maybe not going to be a sustainable.
Hey, conferences haven't changed their names. We still got the Big 12 and the Big 10.
That's true. Maybe you'll just roll with it. Who knows? I love these matchups. I love that this is happening. Again, as much as I'm excited for like all of the top teams, if Alabama plays on the 4th and UConn and Houston, whatever, I'm still going to want to watch them play, even if they're playing and not if, certainly when those teams will play teams that are in the 300s at KenPom. I'm still excited for those games because we'll get to see newcomers. I'm excited to see what Liam McNeely looks at UConn. I'm excited to see the newcomers for all those programs, but I also want to see some competitive basketball. And I think it's a completely reasonable ask to say, I want to see competitive college basketball on the first day of the season. It seems crazy that is not something that we have really gotten the last couple of years. We had Kansas State and USC, which frankly just turned out to not be 2 very good teams last year. That was unfortunate. They were both expected to be better than they were, but these are going to be competitive games. Josh Schertz versus Herb Sendek is an incredibly fun coaching matchup.
Right?
That is great. That is an exciting, fun game. Those two teams have a lot of talent. Avila, of course, following his coach to St. Louis. They're going to be a good team in the A10. Santa Clara has routinely been very, very good the last couple of years. They have some high-profile transfers coming in this year. McNeese just won 30 games last year. They're basically playing a pseudo road game against South Dakota State in South Dakota. That's extremely fun. Chris Mack is back in college basketball at Charleston, hoping to keep that team relevant after they lose Pat Kelsey. That's a ton of good quality storylines. It's not Duke versus Alabama on day one, but and I don't know if we're ever going to get that again, because those teams don't want to do that, especially in the transfer portal era where we've seen it. Teams are not figuring out their rosters for like a month. Or longer in some situations because your team is completely over. Even the best teams in college basketball have 2, 3, 4 newcomers. Some of them are entire starting lineups. Some of them just adding a couple of guys. But it's a new era and it's different now. And I don't blame these coaches for not wanting to subject themselves to an early season loss that could come back and bite them. I actually don't even remember the result of that Kansas State USC game, but whichever team, USC was way out of the running later in the season anyway, but whatever team lost that game hurt their chances of making the NCAA tournament. And that kind of sucks. And I don't like that that's how teams think about it, but they have to. That has to be a factor. And so they're protecting themselves with their schedules. And I think we're going to continue to see that. So the best way to get quality competitive basketball early in the season is to get these mid-major teams to be willing to play each other and challenge each other. And that's what the folks at Field of 68 have done. They've helped put together this event. They got these 6 teams, 6 quality programs, or at least a handful of teams that I expect to be in the running for NCAA tournament bids this year. And I think it's a creative and unique and fun opportunity to see some good basketball on the first day of the season.
Hey, Andy, I wonder what kind of offer Field of 68 made to Will Wade to get McNeese to play in this game. What you think it was a certain kind of offer? If you know, you know. Okay. But I mean, the fact that, as you just said there, it's an event. Mm-hmm. And I think that's part of it is like, I feel like, weren't there a couple years where the Champions Classic was like, not this Monday, but like that Tuesday of the first week, right? Yeah. Like just having a non-one-off event to look forward to on the first day is like, man, I could just sit down and watch all 3 of these games on that Monday, and that would be awesome. And I think that's part of what excites me is it's like, oh, cool. And as you noted, Jeff Goodman said there might even be a 4th game added to this thing. And so that means, Andy, it's going to have to start, noon or so Central Time, just like we would get on Thursday of the first week of the NCAA tournament. So I think that side of it's really fun too, that it's a thing. Yeah. And I know these matchups to some people are not going to be like sexy because it's not teams like you were saying earlier, like Alabama or Duke. But the people who are listening to a college basketball podcast in June, they love these matchups just like you and I do. And I think it's going to be great. McNeese legitimately might be ranked in the preseason. Like with that's the kind of stuff about it. Andy, one other point that I noted from their release on this thing is that the games, they said, will be broadcast on the Field of 68's YouTube channel and Twitter feeds. And what's interesting to me about that is this is not the first event that is not going to be on traditional TV. The Players Era Festival, the NIL sponsored MTE that we're going to get around Thanksgiving time it's a yet to be announced streaming partner, but it's not expected to be broadcast on TV either. And so it's interesting, Andy, that we're getting more of this kind of thing cropping up.
I will say this to conclude what I have to say about this event and to conclude the show, because I've been saying this phrase quite a bit on this show, on my other show for Locked On Zags. It's from Moneyball, one of my favorite movies. Adapt or die. That is the key. TV is dying, or it's at least not as popular as it was. Finding new outlets. You're not going to get national TV shows who are going to be super invested in McNeese and South Dakota State. It's not going to happen. You're going to waste your time and waste your energy trying to get, any CBS or anybody to watch these games. So put it somewhere else.
Yeah.
But why not? I mean, obviously for Field of 68, this is amazing for them because they're going to have a huge amount of influx of viewers and listeners and all that, which is great for them and it's great for the sport. But you're not you have to be willing to be flexible on this and you have to be willing to do things differently. The Players Era Festival in general is the perfect example of adapt or die. Go find a way to make this event comes up and it's challenging the other MTEs. It's challenging ESPN events. It's challenging Atlantis and all them to make that adjustment, to be willing to meet keep up with the Joneses, as it were. So adapt or die feels like the right phrase here. And we're seeing that happen where an issue in college basketball, a lack of good games on the first day of the season, is being rectified. And it's being done in a way that goes against the traditional powers at the TV level. And I think it's good for the sport, and it's good for the just kind of rejuvenation of college basketball going forward. Isaac, that is where we're going to wrap it up for today and for this week here on the Locked On College Basketball Podcast. Next week, we got an awesome guest lined up earlier in the week, and then we're talking NBA draft throughout the rest of the week. That's starting on Wednesday, and the second round's on Thursday. We'll talk about that, and then we'll get you going into the rest of the offseason. More portal updates, more recruiting updates. We'll start doing some team previews, some conference previews, all that good stuff coming your way. Like you said, it's not just a podcast from November to March. We are here 5 days a week, all season long. Looking forward to continuing to do that throughout the offseason. As always, apologies to the lawyer family. Let's go Wildcats. And until next week, peace.